All right, hello everybody. Today we are going to be talking about the art of persuasion, public speaking, what makes you a great public speaker, what elements you can incorporate when you're speaking to others to communicate more effectively, and all those good things. I'm Tiffany. I'm your Vice President of Marketing for Interclub Council, and I'm joined by my two co-hosts today, Alexis Olmsted and Samantha Miller. So if they'd like to introduce themselves briefly, let's start with Alexis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Olmsted, and I'm currently the Executive Vice President or EVP of ICC. And I'm so excited to be with you and talking about the art of persuasion and everything public speaking related. And we're so happy to have Samantha from the debate team, so I'll pass it off to her.
Yes, thanks, Alexa. I'm Samantha. I participate on the Waves debate team here at Pepperdine, and I'm specifically in charge of the Let's Argue program. So that's just teaching people how to debate in the elementary school and middle school levels here in LA. So I'm so excited to kind of expand that knowledge to a college level today.
Awesome. So yes, we're so lucky as Interclub Council to be partnering with the co-curricular of Waves Debate or Pepperdine's debate team. And we're so lucky to have Samantha here today and her expertise. So let's go ahead and jump right in and talk all things persuasion. So some of you might be sitting there going, okay, I'm a student leader or I'm a student at Pepperdine, but like, why do I need to learn persuasion? That's something for politicians and debaters, and maybe if you're a teacher to persuade people to participate. But otherwise, why do I as a student, or why do I as like a Pepperdine student specifically, need to learn what persuasion is and how to use it? First off, it's being a good global citizen, understanding multiple perspectives, understanding where people are coming from and the different experiences that they hold. And in order to express those perspectives, you need to understand persuasion and communication techniques. Otherwise, you run the risk of being misunderstood. But if we're able to communicate and persuade each other effectively, this helps us to understand one another at a deeper level than just perhaps like talking in a normal or like basic way. Secondly, it teaches you how to connect with others. A lot of persuasion and a lot of communication is understanding the psychology behind communication, understanding how people receive your words, and also the processes that go on, maybe subconsciously, on how you choose to present yourself. So, by learning persuasion and communication, you again learn those global citizenship techniques and ideas in order to connect with other people. This is especially important when you're meeting new people, say at a new job or new friends, because the way that they approach communication might be different than yours. However, if you have a basic understanding of persuasion, then you might be able to understand better where that person might be coming from. Thirdly, I suppose the most intuitively is that you're able to express your points more convincingly. This can help across a variety of different situations. For instance, in classes, when you're working in group projects and you have a particular vision for how you want it to go, understanding persuasion will help you to express that more fully to your classmates. Perhaps you're discussing your grade with a professor and they want to understand the work that went into your project. You're able to persuade them of the reality of the situation. You're able to communicate effectively in order to make your point clear. It's also very important outside of an academic context. It's important within the business world as well. I know that a lot of us after college, or hopefully during college even, might have a job or might have more than one job or an internship or something else along those lines. And so understanding persuasion and communication techniques can help you, especially with things like pitches for new projects at work, or convincing, new customers to come and buy your product, especially in retail. So it's just very applicable across multiple different fields to be able to persuade people of your opinion or of your point. Next is advocacy for causes you view as important. I believe that a lot of us have core values that direct the way that we react and interact with other people on a daily basis. But more than that, a lot of us also have like greater causes that we view as very important when we're looking at the world. For some of us, that might be equity for all, having some sort of basis for like financial care for everyone, and that's reflected in politics. Or maybe it's being, literate in understanding of other cultures. And so being able to be persuasive and to be able to communicate with other people helps you advocate for those causes you view as important. say you really value climate change and you think that we should, as a community, do something about it, if you're able to persuade people of the issue of climate change, that's more likely to affect the change you want to see by using these persuasive techniques. Next, I touched on it briefly, but professional development is also very important. Every interview, I like to say, is a debate. Every interview that you go into, it's a debate on why you will be an asset to a certain company or project. And so if you're able to persuade people of the different talents that you have, you're more likely to have more opportunities if you're able to convince them appropriately. And using good communication techniques, I truly believe that is possible. And lastly, communicating in the virtual environment. Clearly, this semester is not necessarily anything that we expected, but with that comes its own difficulties of learning how to communicate across the screen, to get your point and your passion across the video camera. And so if you're able to identify the basics of communication, you can then extrapolate that and apply it to the very specific situation that we're in currently, where likely you're watching this over YouTube rather than all of us gathering in a classroom as we would normally host a workshop. And a little bit more obviously, I'm even using persuasion right now to get you to listen to this presentation in the first place. I'm trying to convince you of why this is worth your time. And it's something that you can use in similar formats as well. But now that we've established why we should learn persuasion through me persuading you, I'd like to pass it off to Alexis for her portion of the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Those are all so important, and persuasion, we use it in our everyday lives all the time, even though we may not know it. So thank you so much for touching on that. Oops. All right. So I'm just going to quickly go over public speaking basics. If you have been in a comm class or taken public speaking in high school or at another academic institution, you will probably recognize a lot of these, but I think it's really important to reinforce them because they are so important and so integral in becoming a great public speaker and learning how to persuade others. So first off, I just want to emphasize, try to avoid using filler words. We all do this in our everyday life. It's unavoidable, especially when we're nervous or we don't know what to say or we forget what we're going to say. We try to use language like, okay, I mean, so, a lot of the time in our speeches. And even though we can't help it, a lot of times this makes you seem less credible and less confident as well. So just a few tips instead of using filler words. First of all, you can pause for 1 to 2 seconds. Most people think pausing when you're giving a speech is really awkward and it shows you don't know what you're talking about or that you've forgotten what you're talking about. But actually, pausing is a very natural thing that we use in our vocal cadence. And it's just very, like I said, it's a natural thing to do and people won't think it's awkward. It's much better than using filler words if you've forgotten what you're about to say. So just take a few minutes, collect your thoughts, and it's going to make you seem more confident and more professional in the long run. Also, you can slow down. This is really important because if you're talking too fast, you can get tripped up on your words, and you can, again, this goes on with pausing, just slow down, take a breath, it'll be okay, and try to collect your thoughts as you go. And thirdly, you can just develop awareness of what filler words you're using, what language you're using, and just how fast you're talking, how loud you're speaking. All that really contributes to your ability to effectively persuade others. Just some general tips on how to avoid using filler words in general. If you're giving a speech that's memorized or you're just trying to practice your speech giving skills, a great way to do this is to record yourself. And this is just a great way to play back and see which filler words you're using, or if you're talking too fast, too slow, and what you think would be best to effectively persuade people or whatever your purpose is for giving this speech. Next, this sounds really stupid, but you can identify your word nemesis. I know at least for me, I use the word a lot. And so for me, it's being intentional about trying not to say that word. And so once you find that word that's essentially your word nemesis, then you can set yourself free from it by intentionally thinking about it. And you don't have to think about it all the time, but really just try to think about when you're using that word, when you tend to use that word, and you can try to cut it out from there. And then lastly, accept imperfection. A few filler words here and there are not going to hurt you. It's really just something, we all do, and nobody's perfect. Nobody can be perfect. So accept your imperfections. It will be okay. As long as you're trying to improve, I promise you, you will be good. All right, so the next one is just some general tips. And I think these are really important when anybody is speaking in front of, a general audience, or even if you're just speaking to a small group of people. The first one is to know your audience. Are they students? Are they family? Are they friends? Is it a professor? Is it a teacher? Is it President Gash? I don't know. The audience is really going to dictate your purpose and how you're going to speak. And, it will give you some insight into what, personal stories you can share during your speech, or again, just what your general purpose is. Are you trying to entertain? Are you trying to inform? Are you trying to get a good grade, essentially? And just knowing your audience will really help you in the long run. And regardless of who your audience is, I would encourage you to show some personality. Everybody loves humor. Everybody loves a joke here and there. And if people can see your personality, then they're really going to think that you're a more credible person, and they're going to feel more connected to you as well. So that's really important. Next, I believe my third grade teacher used to always tell me this, and she used to always say, practice makes permanent. And I used to hate it so much, because I was all like, no, that's not the right saying. It's practice makes perfect. But really, like I said in the last slide, nobody can be perfect, and you're never going to reach perfection. So it really is practice makes permanent, because the more you practice, the more you record yourself, or you practice with distractions, or you give your speech to a family member or a friend, or you even practice in the mirror. That's a great thing to do if nobody's around, or you can speak to your dog or your cat or whoever is there to listen to you, essentially. And the more you practice it, the more you know yourself, the more you know when you forget things, when you tend to use filler words, that type of thing. So it can be a really great tip. Just practice a lot. You never want to wing anything, go into anything blind. And finally, just utilize gestures and eye contact. Eye contact, I think, is especially important. You want to make sure you're looking at the audience. You don't want to stare at one person for the entirety of your speech. That's really awkward and weird, but just make sure every few seconds you're looking around the room, making eye contact with different people. This, again, will just help them feel more connected to you and more likely to listen to you if they know that you're looking at them. And also utilizing gestures is really important. I tend to use lots of excessive gestures with my hand, probably as you can tell. But one thing for me when I'm in front of an audience, and even on Zoom, this can be really helpful because you can still see your hands moving, is I usually like to fold my hands and then put them right at my stomach, right about my belly button, and just keep them folded when I'm about to make a point. Say I'm giving a 3-point speech and I'm about to make a point. When you make your point, you can gesture and then put your hands back where they originally were. And keep doing this as you make more points. And that will really emphasize certain points and allow you, you don't want to have too many gestures, because then it just looks weird and feels like you're making too many points or you're out of control with your gestures. So that's just a really helpful way to use your gestures, utilize them in an effective way. Okay, now I'm going to pass it off to the wonderful Samantha. She's from debate team, as you guys already heard, so she has some great tips for you.
Thanks, Alexis. So I want to specifically go into, Alexis went over a lot how to use nonverbals really persuasively in speeches, and how I think that really came out really good. So I want to go into directly, how do we use nonverbals for persuasion itself? If you're in front of an audience, you want to persuade them of something, you really want them to listen to, what are the tips you use? So first of all, we're going to talk about delivery style. So your initial credibility of how your audience perceives you impacts how you should speak. And this isn't something we really think about a lot. However, if you have low initial credibility, if people don't really know you, if you're just talking to your friends, if you're talking to a group of peers, people are actually more likely to believe you if you talk colloquially, if you deliver it in a conversational style. And so that is kind of builds on the effect of uh, peers, and you build upon your friendships and relationships in that style of speaking. But on the other hand, if you have high initial credibility, you should try to use large words. You should try to use a dynamic and authoritative style. And that builds on the expectations of the audience. So when the audience have their expectations of you fulfilled, they're more likely to believe what you're saying is true as well, because they view you as a more true and authentic person in general. And so that can really help you when you're delivering a speech to think about beforehand, as Alexis said, who am I delivering this to and what do they expect of me? So that's my first tip for you guys. My next tip is using immediacy cues correctly. So some examples of these, especially if we're looking over Zoom, we want to give a lot of nonverbal warmth because we're just talking to a blank screen that's in front of us, and we really want to try to connect with people in a different way. So of course we want to keep trying to make eye contact, we keep wanting to try to smile, but sometimes we can overuse these things and it can come off as disingenuine. So if you are constantly smiling at wrong times, if you're constantly making eye contact, it can come off as really creepy, to be honest, especially over Zoom when you don't quite have those in-person connections. So you have to be really conscious of, how am I smiling? How am I making eye contact? And use it at appropriate points. And so then those points of connection that you make will feel more meaningful. And you kind of want to build up to those points of connection. So it's really a climax of your speech. So that's immediacy cues. My next tip I have for you guys is how to use open body language. So open body languages support persuasive messages. So if you want to be persuasive, you want to open up your body, maybe roll your shoulders back, open up your arms, and the audience can see that as more inviting. However, you also want to try to get your audience into that posture too. So this is also one of those things where you can kind of see mirroring in it. So if you open up your body and you relax yourself and you try to get your audience relaxed, maybe make a joke, maybe connect them before the speech, then when your body is open and their body is open, it increases the reception of the message because everyone feels more relaxed. And instead of concentrating on being tense and holding in a lot of energy, then they just have time to actually receive what you're saying and they view you as more persuasive because of that as well. So that's my tip on open body language. So the next one is something we hear a lot about probably in our comm classes and speech classes about using our space effectively. And so the way we see this in in-person speeches is that we usually want to be closer to other people. We want to utilize our space. We go out into the audience. We go out and connect with people, make eye contact, get onto the corner of the stage when you're saying something really important. And so that also helps because you can project and everyone can hear you. But what do we do when we're in a Zoom environment? We can't really move. We're really stationary. We want to think about using our hands to fill up the space, but also another really big tip is you want to think about how you're positioned in the frame of your camera. So we don't want to have a weird angle on ourselves. We don't want to have weird lighting. So in a lot of ways, what we see that is a laptop that's positioned too high above us or too low above us, which kind of gives like an angle up our nose or like looking down from really up high. So we want to make sure that we have a real clear line of sight to who we're talking to. And that's how we can best utilize our space on Zoom, is really making sure that we're connecting on that level. So that's my tip for Zoom in that way. And so another thing that we haven't really talked about much is what do we want to do if we're trying to persuade someone of something in the short term versus in the long term. And this is something that we can see in student leadership. Maybe in the short term, you want to convince another club to have an activity with you, or maybe in the long term, you want to convince administration to begin hearing what your club is saying, begin hearing and creating a process of change with that. So those actually lend themselves to two different styles of speaking. So if you want to do something in the short term, convince someone of something that's going to happen pretty soon, you want to use what's called peripheral cues. And so the way you do that is you convince them that there's a scarcity of what you have. So you can convey that through breathlessness, you can convey that through eagerness. And so when you get really excited about it and you get really ramped up about it, then you're going to convey that emotion to your audience as well. And that's going to get them excited about it in the short term. You can also use reciprocity, which means you can promise something to them if they do something for you. That's also another really good technique to think about. So those things work really good in the short term. But if we want to put roots down for long-term change with your message, this has less to do with body language. This has less to do with how excited you get about it. It has more to do with centering a really strong message. And so this is when you want to make sure that your body language is not just carrying it, but you have a theme that you keep coming back to over and over and over again. And you can convey that in a really powerful way because you have it prepared beforehand. And so if you have something you want to do in the long term, that is how you get it done versus what you want to get done in the short term. And so moving on to attire, this is not something that people really think about a ton, I would suppose, in most cases, or in the very least, you just wear what makes you feel good. But especially over Zoom, it's really important to make sure that you're popping out against the background of whatever you're in. So we see this in studies dating back to the famous Kennedy-Nixon debate, when Nixon wore this really gray suit and it just blended into the background. And then they saw Kennedy as more persuasive and a more energetic guy. And we probably still think of those two presidents in the past continuing on in that kind of tradition. So it's really important, even for political elite, about how they dress. And so when you're thinking about doing this in Zoom, you either want to make sure that what you're wearing is a strong, bold color that contrasts against a dark background or a light background, or your background has something that contrasts well with your outfit. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a blank background, but you have to think, okay, who am I talking to? Would it be best to have a bookshelf behind me? Would it be best to have a room behind me? Because most people don't just connect to blank walls. So depending on your audience, it might actually be better than just framing yourself behind a blank wall, but to frame yourself in something that people can connect with you and see you in. And so those are all things you really have to take into account when you're thinking about, oh, how do I connect with someone in Zoom? Is what I'm wearing bold enough, and is the background behind me bold enough that they don't just lose interest and kind of stands out from the rest of the crowd? And so next, we're going to learn about hand gestures a little bit. And so this is something that also really gets pounded in COM 180. Oh, prepare your hand gestures. Make sure you have this set of hand gestures and practice it over and over again. But if you're actually giving a speech or you're trying to persuade someone, this can really come off as disingenuous. So if you go, oh, first, second, third, people will feel really rigid and won't really get what you're saying. They'll instead pay attention to these hand gestures that feel really pre-rehearsed. And so that can detract from the persuasive message you're trying to do. So what you do want to do is think about hand gestures beforehand, but make sure they're unique. Make sure they're really varied. Don't do the same thing over again. Don't do things that seem like the obvious thing to do. So if you're talking about lifting people out of poverty, oh, you might go like this, oh, I'm lifting them out of poverty, but that can just seem really disingenuous and kind of take people out of how impactful your message should really be. So instead of doing that, you could say, oh, I want to lift people out of poverty. And then you make time and you stop and you stand. And then, like we were talking about beforehand, then you could smile. And that would be a really good way to use immediacy cues and use a little bit of warmth and make people feel like they're really connecting with you in that moment. And so that's just one thing you might want to think about there. Another thing to note when you're thinking about preparing hand gestures beforehand is that if you start with palms up hand gestures, they're more inviting. And if you start with palms down gestures, they're more dominant. So think about which message you're trying to convey. Are you trying to invite people into a space? Or are you trying to express that you are the authority on the matter? And those are two different ways you can kind of show what you want to say through your hand gestures. And so moving on to the last point that I want to talk about is rate of speech. And this is also something that's a little tricky to get at. As Alexis said, If we go too fast, we can often overuse different types of words or kind of lose track of our message. However, higher rates of speech have actually been shown to increase attention and make listeners more prone to goal-oriented behavior. So if you feel comfortable speaking at a faster rate, don't feel like you have to slow down just because everyone else around you is speaking slowly or that your COM 180 teacher said you should speak slowly. People who speak too slow actually lose their message in the minds of the audience some way. And so if you're thinking, oh, how fast should I go? How fast is appropriate? Normal rate of conversation is around 150 words per minute. But if you give speeches around 200 words per minute, so a little faster than you're usually used to talking to other people, that's perceived as more persuasive, and that will actually convey persuasion to your audience better. And this is especially true if you're trying to convince people of something that they didn't believe beforehand. So if they didn't believe it beforehand, barrage them with information, make sure that they can still understand what you're saying and you still feel in control of the message, but don't feel afraid to go too fast. And so those are the couple of points I have for persuasion. I've really enjoyed talking. I'll pass it off to Tiffany again now.
Thank you so much, Samantha. So now we're going to explain a game that you can play at home. I'm aware of that some of you might be watching this after the fact. So I will explain the rules and then maybe we'll host a practice round between all of us so you guys can see how it works. But essentially it's called the hot air balloon game. And in this hypothetical hot air balloon, there are two people, but there's only room enough for one. So between these two people, they have to persuade one another why they should stay in the hot air balloon. And then the other would have to leave, presumably by parachute, and then the other one could go on the ride that they prefer to go on. So the goal is to stay in the hot air balloon by persuading your audience that you should be the one who's riding this air balloon. So I'm thinking maybe that Alexis and then maybe Jerry, if you want to participate in this game. Okay, I see some nods. Okay, I'll just give you guys occupations and you can argue why you should stay in the hot air balloon based on an occupation. So one of you could be a fashion designer and one of you could be a chef. So y'all pick which one you want.
I'll be the chef.
Okay, all right. So I'll give you each around, I think probably 2 minutes should be sufficient. And then Samantha and Sabrina and I can listen and we can decide who persuaded us more thoroughly.
I could go first.
Okay.
Wait, so I'm trying to persuade why I need to stay in the balloon, correct?
Right. So however you want to do that, explain your benefit to society as a fashion designer, explain why you are involved with this balloon somehow, just however you want to persuade myself, Sabrina, and Samantha that you should be the one to stay in the hot air balloon.
I will try. We'll try, keyword try. Okay, do I begin?
Yes, you have up to 2 minutes starting now.
This is so daunting. Okay. I need to stay in this hot air balloon because we have Fashion Week this upcoming weekend and all flights have been booked. And in fact, there's kind of a least number of air travel due to the recent pandemic. And it's even more important because this is a nonprofit fashion show where all the proceeds are going to various educational resources to improve, I guess, literature rates and like providing literature and educational materials to different low socioeconomic communities. So it's very critical that we go to this fashion show to raise awareness, to bring success, and to help marginalized communities that don't always have access to these resources. Thank you.
I love that. Awesome. Okay, so we have Jerry the fashion designer with his awesome initiatives. So Alexis, how do you counter this as a chef? Why should you stay in the hot air balloon?
It's a very good question, Tiffany. Well, as a chef, I understand, Jerry, that you are a fashion designer and you are going to this fashion show in order to help marginalized communities. And I really think that is such a great, great cause that you are so passionate about. And I'm so proud of you for that. But as a chef, I believe I personally am the most qualified person to be in this hot air balloon because chefs, I am extremely detail oriented. Do you know how much work it takes for me in order to cook a dish and to please people? I think about everything. I think about the planning process, the prep, the cooking, the plating, the serving, making everyone happy. And so for me, to be in this hot air balloon, I can make sure the fire is lit for the hot air balloon to go up and that we will not go down, that we will not crash. And I really just want that responsibility. And it is part of me as a chef that really, really would just like to make sure the hot air balloon doesn't go down. Also, you may ask yourself, you cannot cook food in a hot air balloon, but I will say, yes, you can. If I get, I guess I'm the only person in the hot air balloon. If I get hungry, I can make myself food. And you may ask, can you make food out of air? Well, I'm a chef. I, am very just proud of myself and have a lot of pride. And I could definitely try that. So because of those reasons, I rest my case here. You'll have to get out of the hot air balloon.
Okay, awesome, you guys. So throughout all of your argumentation, people who are watching at home definitely could have told that Alexis used a lot of hand gestures. Jerry used meaningful pauses, all those great nonverbal cues that Samantha and Alexis talked about. Samantha, do you want to comment on what other rhetorical strategies you saw used?
Sure. I noticed that Alexis used a lack of filler words. So she really slowed down sometimes and thought about what she was going to say, and I thought that was really good. I also noticed that Jerry used a lot of what I called immediacy cues. So he was smiling a lot. He was really connecting with the audience through laughing and creating kind of a good environment for people. So that's what I noticed.
Sabrina, did you have any comments based on what you observed as our third judge?
I thought both had very persuasive arguments. I appreciated that you leaned into both skill sets. So Jerry, in the sense of like what you could provide to people, and Alexis on like tackling the logistics and the fact that you need to get to and from.
All right, thank you, Sabrina. But I think that's great. Samantha, do you want to decide who should stay in the hot air balloon based on persuasive strategy?
That's a big, it was really close for me. Personally, I might choose Jerry. I feel like he did a good job with his benefits to society, but Alexis did really good too. I liked everyone's point.
I agree. I thought they both did really great. So essentially, for those of you at home who are watching, this is how you play the hot air balloon game. You essentially set up two sides with two hypotheticals. It could be occupations, it could be famous figures, et cetera, and have your friends tell you who would they keep in the hot air balloon. But otherwise, Alexis, could you pull back up the presentation so we can go over the last slide?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, sorry, my dogs are barking.
Okay, awesome. So there are many different resources at Pepperdine and not at Pepperdine that you can utilize in order to be the best public speaker you can be, both if you're in person and if you're virtual. So first of all, the Pepperdine Speech Lab, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. I think I never took Com 180, but I believe that you're encouraged when you're in Com 180 to go visit the Speech Lab. And essentially, you can find help here for academic speeches, general public speaking skills, organization of ideas, that sort of thing. You set that up by appointment through the online library website for Pepperdine. Secondly, you have Interclub Council as a resource always, especially when it comes to leadership skills, something that's very integral to public speaking that I think was touched on a little bit in every section is that confidence and knowing that you're in control of your message is really central to public speaking. And so as Interclub Council, we like to invest in our student leaders to inspire that confidence, whether it's by teaching you guys new skills, by making more resources available to get help from other sources, or just allowing you that space to practice your leadership and to hone in on your leadership style in order so that you are more confident when it comes to public speaking, whether it's regarding your club or even outside of the realm of your club. You always can email myself at iccpublicity@pepperdine.edu or iccgeneral@pepperdine.edu if you have any questions regarding our upcoming workshops, or if you want to talk a little bit more specifically about the things we touched on today. Next, one of the great resources at Pepperdine is that we do have a debate team, Waves Debate. And Waves Debate is made up of multiple different departments, so to speak. It has the competitive side, which is the traditional debate environment that I think a lot of us are exposed to. But there are many more facets of the team, like Samantha hinted at when she introduced herself. She's in charge of the Let's Argue branch of debate, or Let's Argue Elementary. And essentially, this is where debate students go into different classrooms of elementary schools and middle schools now to explain rhetorical strategy and argumentation strategy, really helping to develop them into good persuasive speakers as they grow older. So if you're interested in investing in the different students in our community, like our greater Los Angeles community, definitely reach out to her or Abby Smith, who is the debate director. There's also the programming side of debate, which includes different roundtable discussions with other organizations on campus, or even having large style convocation events that we've hosted in the past. So there's lots to get involved in Waves Debate and a lot to learn about as far as perfecting your own argumentation skills and rhetorical strategies. So definitely reach out if you're interested in a more intensive practice of persuasion to the email abby.smith@pepperdine.edu. And lastly, we touched a little bit on appearance and making sure that you pop out in contrast to your background, especially when we're talking about Zoom. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to do that, especially if you're at home and just in front of a blank white wall. I'm actually in front of a blank white wall right now. But the great thing about the internet is that there are plenty of resources and pictures. And if making sure supporting creators is important to you, a really great resource to use is unsplash.com. This is where photographers have donated their materials for free. So you're not at all like not paying them and disenfranchising them by doing so. They have donated their skills and talents for people to use these pictures for free. So you can use them for Zoom backgrounds, presentations, projects, but just that little added pop and show of intentionality when you're looking at how you're presenting yourself online. But otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for listening to what we had to say. I hope that some of these resources, skills, and tips have helped you or have inspired you to go reach out for more additional support to learn the art of persuasion. Thank you guys, and have a great week.